The hunt begins. The FBI does not put your name on this list unless you've already proven one thing. You can't be stopped quietly. The 10 most wanted list exists because these people escaped prison, crossed state lines, changed identities, and kept killing. They robbed banks, hijacked vehicles, bombed public spaces, murdered families, and disappeared before anyone could stop them. Normal arrests failed. Closed investigations failed. So the FBI made the hunt public. This list is a last resort. It turns faces into targets and anonymity into a death sentence. Once your name is released, every phone call, every motel check-in, every stranger becomes a liability. Some of these fugitives were caught within months. Others stayed free for decades. A few were never captured alive. What matters isn't how famous they became or how many victims they left behind. What matters is that each one forced the FBI to change how it hunts human beings. This isn't a ranking. It isn't entertainment. It's a record of criminals so dangerous that the government asked an entire nation to help track them down. These are the most wanted fugitives ever. Why the FBI created this list? The first name ever placed on the FBI's most wanted list wasn't symbolic. It was necessary. Thomas James Holden was already a career criminal before the list even existed. By the 1920s, he was robbing banks, hijacking trucks loaded with cash, and holding up trains with his crew. This wasn't petty crime. This was organized, violent, and relentless. In 1928, Holden was finally caught and sentenced to 25 years in prison. 2 years later, he escaped. And just like that, he was back on the streets, forming a new gang and going right back to robbing buses, trains, and banks. In 1931, he was captured again and sent to Alcatraz. Authorities thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. In 1947, Holden was paroled. 2 years later, during a domestic dispute, he murdered his wife and 2 of her relatives, then fled the state. This time, he didn't run like a criminal. He vanished like a civilian. That was the breaking point. When the FBI released its first 10 most wanted list in 1950, Holden's name was on it. His face was everywhere. And within a year, he was found in Oregon, living under a fake name, working a normal job, blending in perfectly. He was arrested, convicted of murder, and died in prison a few years later. Holden wasn't the worst criminal in history, but he proved something terrifying. Dangerous men don't always look dangerous. And that realization gave birth to the list. The first monster, a criminal just starting out. By the mid-1990s, the most wanted list was no longer dealing with bank robbers and escape artists. It was hunting something far more unpredictable. On July 27, 1996, thousands of people packed Centennial Olympic Park in Atlanta, celebrating the Summer Games. Music played, crowds gathered, and then a bomb went off. 2 people were killed. More than 100 were injured. Panic spread through the park in seconds. The man responsible disappeared immediately. His name was Eric Rudolph. This wasn't a random act of violence. Over the next 2 years, Rudolph carried out a series of bombings across the southern United States. Abortion clinics were targeted. A lesbian nightclub was hit. Another clinic bombing in Birmingham killed a police officer and injured several others. His devices were homemade, packed with nails to maximize damage. Rudolph wasn't trying to escape quietly. He wanted attention. He wanted fear. He believed the U.S. government represented everything he hated, and he was willing to kill civilians to prove his point. After the Olympic bombing, Rudolph vanished into the Appalachian Mountains. For years, he lived like a ghost, moving through forests, stealing food, avoiding detection while the FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in its history. His face stayed on the most wanted list as years passed with no arrest. In 2003, after nearly 5 years on the run, Rudolph was finally captured behind a grocery store in North Carolina. In court, he pleaded guilty to multiple murders and received 4 consecutive life sentences. He now sits in ADX Florence, one of the most secure prisons in America. His case marked a shift. The most wanted list was no longer just chasing criminals. It was hunting ideology. When murder becomes a goal, the era of serial killers. Unlike the bombings, this kind of danger didn't announce itself. It smiled. In the 1970s, young women across the United States began disappearing without warning. College campuses, parking lots, crowded public places. There were no explosions, no manifestos, no patterns anyone could see at first. The man responsible blended in perfectly. His name was Ted Bundy. Bundy didn't overpower his victims in dark alleys. He approached them in daylight, pretending to be injured, asking for help, wearing casts or using crutches to lower their guard. Witnesses later said he seemed polite, intelligent, harmless. That illusion was the weapon. Once he gained trust, he struck. Victims were beaten unconscious, abducted and driven away while people walked past, unaware of what they had just seen. Over time, investigators realized this wasn't a local predator. Bundy was crossing state lines, leaving bodies scattered across multiple states. Even when he was arrested, the danger didn't stop. Bundy escaped custody not once, but twice. Each escape put the public back at risk. After his second escape, he continued killing. His crimes escalated. The FBI placed him on the most wanted list because this was no longer about solving a case. It was about stopping a man who had learned how to exploit the system itself. Eventually, Bundy was recaptured, convicted, and sentenced to death. He was executed in 1989, but his case left permanent damage. It proved something deeply unsettling. The most dangerous criminals don't always look violent. Sometimes they look trustworthy. Bundy changed how the FBI profiled suspects, how law enforcement viewed charm and intelligence, and how the public understood danger. By the time his name was removed from the list, the fear he created was already woven into American history. Crime without borders, organized crime and financial crime. Not every name on the most wanted list is remembered for blood. Some are remembered for disappearing with it. In September 1983, a Wells Fargo armored car facility in Connecticut was breached from the inside. There was no shootout, no alarms, no chaos. When employees realized what had happened, more than $7 million in cash was gone. The man behind it was Victor Manuel Gerina. He wasn't a violent fugitive running from the law in the usual sense. He was a planner. Gerina knew the schedules, the blind spots, and the system meant to protect the money. After the theft, he didn't flee in a panic. He vanished deliberately. By the time authorities understood the scale of the robbery, Gerina was already out of the country. Investigators believed he was smuggled into Mexico and later into Cuba. His name was added to the FBI's most wanted list in 1984, and it stayed there. Year after year, his face remained public while leads dried up. Decades passed. Gerina was never captured. He became the longest-running fugitive in the history of the list, remaining wanted for more than 30 years. In 2016, his name was quietly removed. Not because he was innocent, but because the FBI admitted something uncomfortable. With no extradition path and no confirmed location, the hunt had reached a dead end. Gerina didn't terrorize cities or leave bodies behind. But his case proved a different kind of failure. Some criminals don't outrun the law. They simply step outside its reach and stay there. Terrorism as a weapon, domestic and international. By the early 1990s, the most wanted list was no longer dealing with fugitives who wanted money or control over individual victims. It was dealing with people who wanted spectacle. On February 26, 1993, a rental van packed with explosives was driven into the underground parking garage of the World Trade Center in New York City. When the bomb detonated, it tore through multiple levels of concrete, killing 6 people and injuring more than 1,000 others. Smoke filled the towers. Office workers fled stairwells in total darkness. The target wasn't just the building, it was fear. The man behind the attack was Ramzi Youssef. Within hours of the bombing, Youssef was gone. He fled the country before investigators fully understood what they were dealing with. But the attack was only the beginning. While on the run, Yusuf helped plan what became known as the Bojinka plot, a scheme so extreme it bordered on unthinkable. The plan involved assassinating the Pope to distract global attention while multiple U.S.-bound passenger planes were bombed mid-air over the Pacific. It was terrorism designed for maximum casualties and maximum shock. The plot failed, but the intent was clear. Yusuf wasn't trying to escape the spotlight. He wanted to hijack it. In 1995, after years on the most wanted list, Yusuf was tracked to Pakistan and arrested while attempting to assemble another bomb, this time hidden inside a child's toy. He was extradited to the United States, convicted for the World Trade Center bombing and conspiracy charges, and sentenced to life in prison plus decades more. He was sent to ADX Florence. His case marked another turning point. The FBI's most wanted list was no longer just a tool to stop fugitives. It had become part of a global effort to prevent mass death before it happened. Those who were stopped: influence and power. Some names stay on the most wanted list, not because the FBI can't find them, but because it can't touch them. Semyon Mogilevich was never a fugitive hiding in the woods or crossing borders under fake names. He was hiding in plain sight, protected by distance, money, and politics. Investigators believed Mogilevich sat at the center of one of the most powerful criminal networks in the world. His reach extended through financial fraud, money laundering, weapons trafficking, and organized crime across Europe and North America. One of his most notorious schemes involved a massive stock fraud operation that drained more than $100 million from investors, then collapsed without warning. The FBI placed him on the most wanted list in 2009, labeling him one of the most dangerous criminals alive. But the list couldn't change geography. Mogilevich was believed to be living freely in Russia, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. That meant no arrest warrant could cross the border, no manhunt could follow. In 2015, his name was removed from the list. Not because the threat was gone, but because the FBI acknowledged the reality of the situation. There was no legal path to bring him in. Mogilevich didn't need to run. He didn't need to hide. He simply stayed where the law could not reach him. His case exposed one of the most uncomfortable truths behind the most wanted list. Sometimes the system knows exactly who the criminal is, and still loses. Cases that never end. Controversy and suspicion. Some cases refuse to stay closed. James Earl Ray was already a small-time criminal when his name became inseparable from one of the most consequential moments in American history. On April 4, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Ray fled the country using a fake passport to escape to Canada and then Europe before being captured in London. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. On paper, the case was finished. But the questions never stopped. Ray later escaped from prison, putting him back on the FBI's most wanted list, before being recaptured days later. After that, he withdrew his confession and claimed he had been framed. No evidence ever proved his innocence. But doubt took root. Members of King's own family publicly stated they believed Ray was not the true killer. Lawsuits were filed. Conspiracy theories spread. Government involvement was whispered about, debated, and never fully resolved. The FBI and the courts stood by the conviction. Ray died in prison in 1998. His case remains one of the most controversial entries ever associated with the most wanted list. Not because of what was proven, but because of what could never be completely silenced. The name that changed everything. By the time Osama bin Laden's name appeared on the FBI's most wanted list, the world already felt smaller and far more dangerous. Long before September 11th, intelligence agencies were tracking his movements, his money, and the growing network forming around him. In the early 1990s, bin Laden was linked to attacks that targeted American interests overseas, including bombings that killed U.S. servicemen and civilians. Each incident pushed him higher on the FBI's priority list. But the scale of his ambition was unlike anything the list had dealt with before. In 1998, coordinated bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania killed more than 200 people. The message was clear. This was not a criminal seeking escape. This was a man declaring war. After September 11, 2001, the most wanted list became symbolic. Bin Laden's face was everywhere. A $25 million reward was announced. His name became synonymous with terror itself. For nearly a decade, he remained hidden, moving through remote compounds, relying on loyalty and secrecy to survive. During that time, global security changed permanently. Airports, surveillance, warfare, privacy, nothing looked the same again. On May 1, 2011, U.S. forces located bin Laden in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The raid ended his life, but not his impact. His case closed one chapter of the most wanted list, while redefining what it meant. This was no longer about fugitives evading arrest. It was about individuals whose existence reshaped history itself. Conclusion: a list that never ends. The FBI's most wanted list was never meant to be comforting. It exists to remind the public of something we'd rather forget, that danger doesn't always announce itself, and justice doesn't always arrive on time. Some of the names you've heard tonight were caught quickly. Others took decades, and a few were never brought in at all. What connects them isn't just crime, it's impact. Each one exposed a weakness in the system, forced changes in law enforcement, and left scars that didn't fade when the case closed. The list updates, the faces change, but the conditions that create most wanted criminals never disappear. That's the warning. Stay aware, stay informed, and understand that history doesn't repeat itself quietly. It escalates. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who follows true crime, and subscribe for more deep dives into the darkest chapters of history. The next name on the list is always closer than we think.